A hand clamped around a woman's arm and yanked her off her feet. She hit the gravel driveway on her side, still curled tight around the bundle in her arms. The bundle was a baby. The baby started to scream. The man standing over her reached down again. He never got there. A boot caught him in the chest and sent him backward into the fence. Wire sang. A three-legged shepherd came out of nowhere, teeth bared, planting itself between the man and the child. The one who threw that kick was 51 years old, silver in his beard, a limp he never explained. His name was Beckett Kane, and once, a long time ago, men like the one in the dirt had feared him. Nobody moved. The baby's cry was the only sound for 100 empty acres. Why was a stranger's child in his driveway? Stay with me. To understand how that baby ended up in the dirt of his driveway, you have to back up to a gray morning a few weeks before. It started, like most of his mornings did, with the horses. Beckett Kane was up before the sun. He always was. 22 years in the Navy does that to a man. It wires the clock inside you so tight that no amount of quiet can loosen it. He pulled on his boots in the dark, filled the coffee pot, and walked out to feed 12 rescued horses that the rest of the world had given up on. That was what he did now. He'd bought 100 acres outside Kerrville, Texas, put up fence with his own hands, and took in animals nobody else wanted. Old ones, broken ones. Horses with scars where a bridle had cut too deep, or a leg that healed crooked. He understood them. He didn't say that out loud to anybody because there wasn't anybody to say it to, but he understood them fine. His only steady company was a German shepherd named Ranger, and Ranger had 3 legs. Lost the 4th to a roadside bomb in a country Beckett didn't like to name. The dog had been a working military animal, decorated, the real thing. When they were both done, when the war was finished with the 2 of them, Beckett had signed the papers to bring the dog home. People said a 3-legged dog wouldn't keep up. Ranger kept up fine. He ran the fence line every morning like he was still on patrol because in his head maybe he was. So that's the picture. 1 man, 1 dog. 12 horses and a whole lot of Texas sky. A phone that never rang. A gate nobody knocked on. And then that gray morning somebody came to the gate. Well, not knocked. She walked the fence line. He saw her before Ranger did, which was rare. A young woman coming slow along the wire, one hand trailing the top rail like she needed it to stay upright. She had a bundle strapped to her chest. He knew before he could see it clearly that the bundle was a baby because of the way she walked, that careful, protective lean a person only gets when they're carrying something that can't carry itself. Beckett set down the feed bucket. Ranger's ears went up. She stopped at the gate. Up close she looked like she hadn't slept in a week, maybe longer. Early 30s, he'd guess, with dark hair pulled back rough and eyes that had done a lot of crying and were done crying now. She wore a black dress that didn't fit the ranch and didn't fit the weather. Funeral clothes. He knew funeral clothes. "You're Beckett Kane," she said, "not a question." "I am. People in town say you were a SEAL." He didn't answer that. He never answered that. He just looked at her and waited, the way he'd learned to wait. The baby made a small sound against her chest, and her whole body shifted to soothe it without her even seeming to notice she'd done it. "My name is Nora Delaney," she said, "and I'm about to ask you the strangest thing anybody's ever asked you. I need you to hear all of it before you say no." Beckett leaned on the gate post. "Go ahead." She took a breath like it cost her something, and then she said it. "Can you be the father of my baby, for one day?" He didn't say anything for a moment. A hawk turned somewhere overhead. Ranger looked from the woman to Beckett and back, trying to read the room the way good dogs do. "One day," Beckett repeated. "One day, that's all. You wouldn't have to feel anything. You wouldn't have to keep anything. Just one day and then I'll walk back down that road and you'll never see me again. I have money. Not a lot, but I have some, and I'll pay you whatever." "Stop," he said it gentle, but it stopped her. "I don't want your money." "Then what do you want?" And that was the thing. He didn't want anything. That was the whole problem with Beckett Kane, the thing the VA counselor had circled on her notepad, and the thing his sister had said on the phone the last time they'd talked, a year back. He didn't want anything anymore. Wanting things had cost him too much. Wanting a mission, wanting men to come home, wanting a marriage that fell apart while he was on the other side of the planet, all of it gone. So he'd stopped. He'd built a fence around 100 acres and a fence around himself, and told himself he was done being needed. And here was a woman he'd never met, standing at his gate with a baby and funeral clothes and a question that made no sense, and something in his chest, something he thought had gone quiet for good, ticked once, like an old engine turning over. He should have said no. Any sane man says no. You don't put your name on a stranger's child, not even for a day, not without knowing what it buys and what it costs. He looked at the baby, then at her. "Only if you tell me why," he said. She looked down at the baby. When she looked back up, she decided to tell the truth, and you could see it settle on her like a weight she'd been carrying alone for too long. "His name is Silas," she said. "My grandfather. He raised me, my mother took off when I was 4 and he took me in, and he's the only real family I've ever had. He's 86, and he's dying. The doctors are talking days now, a week maybe." Beckett nodded slowly. He knew about days and weeks. He'd sat by beds like that. "2 years ago I got married," she went on. "A man named Danny Vance. He was Army, a medic. Silas loved him. God, Silas loved that boy." Her voice caught. She pushed through it. "The last time we were all together before Danny deployed, we sat on Silas's porch and Danny made him a promise. He said, 'When I get back, we're going to fill this house up. Grandkids, Sunday dinners. You're not going to be a lone old man.' And Silas held on to that. He held on to it the whole time Danny was gone." She stopped. "Danny didn't come back," Beckett said, "not a guess." 11 months ago." She said it flat, the way you say a thing you've had to say too many times. "I was 3 months pregnant. He never met his son." Wind moved through the mesquite. The baby slept. "Silas doesn't know," she said. Beckett frowned. "Doesn't know what?" "That Danny's gone." The words came fast now, like water through a crack. "He had a stroke right around when it happened, and his memory comes and goes. Mostly goes now. Every time I visit, he asks me, 'Where's Danny? When's Danny bringing that baby out to meet me?' The first time I tried to tell him the truth, he fell apart. He grieved like it was fresh, and an hour later he'd forgotten again, and I had to watch him find out all over. I couldn't do that to him. I couldn't make him bury that boy every single day for the rest of his life." Beckett said nothing. Ranger had come to sit against his leg. "So I stopped telling him," Nora said. "I let him believe. And now he's dying, and yesterday he grabbed my hand and he said, 'Promise me I'll get to meet him. Promise me I'll hold that baby with his daddy in the room. Let me go knowing you're not alone.'" Her eyes filled, and this time she let them. "I can't give him Danny. Danny's in the ground in San Antonio. But I thought if just once, for one day, a man walked in there who was tall and quiet and steady, a soldier, somebody I could introduce as the boy's father, he could die believing his promise came true. He could go easy. That's all I want. I want the old man to go easy." For a long time Beckett didn't answer. He looked out over his horses. He thought about all the promises he'd heard men make in the dark before things went wrong, and all the ones that never got kept, and the weight a person carries when they're the only one left holding the other end. He thought, this is insane. You don't lie your way into a dying man's last hours. And then he thought about his own father, gone 8 years now, and the things Beckett would have given for one more clean afternoon with him. One where nobody had to know how bad it really was. "What's his name?" Beckett said. "The baby." Nora blinked. "Eli." "Eli." He tested it. Then he crouched down, slow because of the bad leg, until he was level with the bundle on her chest. The baby's eyes were open now, dark and unfocused and brand new to the whole world. Ranger pushed his nose forward and sniffed, and instead of pulling back the way you'd fear, the dog let out a long breath and lay down right there in the dirt at Nora's feet, like he'd decided something. Beckett watched the dog do that. He'd learned a long time ago to trust what Ranger decided. "One day," Beckett said, standing back up, "I'll tell your grandfather whatever he needs to hear, but I'm not doing it for the money, and I'm not doing it because you asked. I'm doing it for the old man. You understand the difference?" "I understand it," she whispered. "Then let's go meet Silas." The drive to the hospice took 40 minutes and neither of them said much. Nora coached him on the way: Danny's rank, the name of his unit, the little details a father would know. Beckett listened and nodded and felt, for the first time in years, the old cold focus of a man walking into a mission. He'd done harder things than this. He'd never done anything that felt more like a lie. Silas Delaney was a small man swallowed up in a big white bed, with hands like knotted rope and eyes the same dark as his granddaughter's. When Nora walked in with the baby, the old man's whole face broke open like sunrise. "There he is," Silas breathed. "There's my boy." And then he looked past her, at the tall, gray-bearded man filling the doorway, and Beckett watched hope and fear fight it out across an old man's face. "Danny," Silas said. Beckett's throat closed. Behind him, Nora had gone rigid. Then Beckett stepped forward, took the old man's rope-knot hand in both of his, and said, in a voice as steady as he could make it, "It's good to finally meet you, sir. Danny told me everything about you. I'm sorry it took me so long to get here." He didn't say, "I'm Danny." He never said it. He let the old man's need fill in the blank, and that was a line he could live on the right side of barely. Silas held his hand and wept and laughed at the same time, and then he reached for the baby, and Nora laid Eli against the old man's chest, and for about an hour the four of them, 5, counting the dog they'd smuggled past the front desk, sat in that little room and were, for all the world, a family. It was late afternoon when Silas finally drifted off, the baby asleep on his chest, his hand still curled around Beckett's fingers. Nora eased Eli away. Beckett gently freed his hand. They stepped out into the hall and neither of them spoke until they got to the car. Nora leaned against the door and shut her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "You gave him that. You have no idea what you gave him." Beckett looked back at the low brick building. The sun was finally breaking through the gray, gold light spilling across the parking lot. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel done. He felt like a man who'd done one good thing. "It's all right," he said. They didn't make it back to one day. The black SUV was already in Beckett's driveway when they turned in off the county road, parked crooked across the gravel like whoever drove it didn't much care where it stopped. A man leaned against the hood. Big. Younger than Beckett by 20 years, Jim Big, with a jaw like Danny's must have been, and none of the kindness Nora had described. Nora went white. "That's Cole," she said, "Danny's brother. You want to stay in the truck?" "No," her hand found the door handle. "If I hide from him, it only makes it worse." Cole pushed off the hood as they climbed out. He didn't look at Beckett. He looked at the baby, and something hungry moved behind his eyes. "Been calling you a week, Nora." His voice was easy, friendly, and wrong. "Mom's worried sick. You disappear with the baby, don't tell anybody where. How's that supposed to look?" "I told your mother I needed time." "Time?" Cole smiled. "See, that's the thing, you've had time. and what you've been doing with it." He pulled a phone from his jacket and turned the screen toward her. "Is real interesting." On the screen was a photo. Beckett, that afternoon, walking into the hospice with his hand on Nora's back. Somebody had followed them. Somebody had been following her for a while. "Who's the old man's new son-in-law?" Cole said. "Who's this, Nora? Because we've got a hearing Thursday, and a judge is going to want to know why a widow who says she's too broke and too broken up to share custody is out here shacking up with some." He finally looked at Beckett, sizing him up, some ranch hand. Now here's where the whole thing changed. Understand what just happened. An hour before, this had been a quiet, aching thing, a kind man helping a dying one. One day. No strings. Now there was a lawyer somewhere and a hearing on Thursday, and a rich family with a private investigator who'd been photographing a grieving woman and her baby like she was a criminal. This wasn't about a promise anymore. This was about who got to keep Eli. And Beckett Kane, who told himself for years he was done being needed, was standing in the middle of it with his name in a stranger's file. "The Vances have money," Nora said quietly to Beckett, not taking her eyes off Cole. "Danny's dad owns half the car lots in 3 counties. When Danny died, they decided I couldn't do this alone. They've been building a case for months. Unstable, grieving, can't provide. They want to raise Eli themselves." Her voice shook. "They want to take my son." "She's not stable," Cole said, easy as anything. "Look at her, look where she is, some stranger's ranch." Beckett stepped forward. Just one step. But he'd spent 22 years learning how to move, and something in the way he did it made Cole shut his mouth. "You've been following her," Beckett said. "Quiet, you put a man on a widow and her baby. You took pictures of her walking into a hospice to see her dying grandfather." He let that sit. "That's what the judge is going to hear about on Thursday. You understand me, son?" Cole's jaw worked. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm the man whose driveway you're parked in." Beckett didn't raise his voice. He never raised his voice. "And you're leaving it now." For a second nobody moved. Ranger had come up beside Beckett, hackles high, that low sound in his chest that means the next thing that happens is going to hurt somebody. Cole looked at the dog, and the man, and the 100 empty acres with no witnesses on them, and he did the math the way bullies do. He put his phone away. "Thursday," he said, climbing back into the SUV. "Bring your ranch hand, Nora, won't matter." He backed out fast, gravel spitting, and then the road was empty and the dust was settling and it was just the two of them again and the baby and the dog. Nora was shaking. Beckett put a hand on her shoulder and it surprised them both. "If you've made it this far with me, do me one favor, hit that subscribe button." Stories like this one, about the people the world writes off and what they've still got left to give, that's all I do here. Stay with me. Because the day Beckett swore would be one day was about to become the fight of his life. "You should go," Nora said. "This was never supposed to touch you. One day, I'll figure out Thursday. I've dragged you in far enough." Beckett looked at her a long moment. Then he looked at Eli, asleep through the whole thing, and at Ranger, who had lain down across Nora's feet again like he had at the gate that morning, like he'd already picked his side. "No," Beckett said. "No. I've spent 3 years telling myself I didn't have anything left anybody could need." He said it slow, like the words were heavy. "Turns out that was just an easy thing to believe. You're not doing Thursday alone." Thursday came gray, like the morning she'd first walked his fence line. Beckett was up before the sun, same as always, but this time he wasn't alone in the house. Nora had stayed in the spare room the last 2 nights safer. They'd both agreed, though neither said much more than that. Eli had slept in a drawer lined with a horse blanket because that was what they had, and Ranger had slept in the doorway of that room and not moved all night. They were loading the truck to drive to the courthouse when the SUV came back. It came fast this time, too fast, sliding sideways on the gravel. Cole was out before it fully stopped, and there was something different in him now. The easy meanness was gone, and something wilder had taken its place. Later, Beckett would learn the Vance's own lawyer had told them that morning the case was thin, that the surveillance would sink them, that they'd likely lose. Cole hadn't taken it well. Cole had decided to solve it himself. "Give me the baby," Cole said. "He's a Vance. He's not staying out here in the dirt with you and some." Cole stopped. He didn't stop. A hand clamped around Nora's arm and yanked her off her feet. She hit the gravel driveway on her side, still curled tight around the bundle in her arms around Eli, and the baby started to scream. Cole reached down again, for the child this time, his big hand closing on the blanket. He never got there. A boot caught him square in the chest, 22 years of training behind it, and sent him backward into the fence. The wire sang. And a three-legged shepherd came off that porch like he'd been fired from a gun, teeth bared, and planted himself between Cole Vance and the child. And every animal instinct in the man told him the next inch he moved would cost him. Cole froze against the fence, Beckett already on him, one forearm across his throat, the other hand pinning the wrist that had grabbed her. "You put your hands on her," Beckett said, very quietly, right against the man's ear, in front of the boy. Cole's bravado was gone. "Man, the baby's supposed to be, get your dog." "Ranger," the dog held. Beckett leaned in another half-inch, enough for Cole to feel exactly how easy the rest would be. And then, because there was a boy screaming 10 feet away and a woman in the dirt, he let the man go. "Nora," Beckett didn't take his eyes off Cole. "You all right? Is he all right?" She was already up on her knees, checking Eli over with shaking hands. "He's okay. He's just scared." "We're okay. Get in the truck." What Cole didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that after the first time he'd shown up uninvited, Beckett had done what old habits told him to do. He'd put 2 cameras on the property, one on the barn, one over the driveway. He'd spent 22 years learning that people who mean you harm always come back, and that the difference between a victim and a witness is a little bit of preparation. The whole thing was on tape. The grab, the fall, the baby's scream. A grown man laying hands on a widow to take her child. They still drove to the courthouse, but everything had changed. The hearing room was small and too bright and full of Vances. Danny's father in a suit that cost more than Beckett's truck, Danny's mother with a face carved out of grief and pride, and their lawyer, slick and certain, right up until the moment Nora's court-appointed attorney stood and asked to enter new evidence. They played the tape. The room went dead quiet. Danny's mother watched her surviving son yank a woman off her feet and reach for a baby, and something in her face came apart. The judge watched it twice. Then she took her glasses off and looked at the Vance family for a long, cold moment, and Beckett knew that look. He'd worn it himself, standing over men who'd done the unforgivable. Beckett testified too. He told the truth, all of it. That Nora had come to him to help a dying man keep a promise. That she'd never asked him for a thing but that one impossible favor. That in a week of watching her, he'd seen a woman running on empty who still put her child first every single hour of every single day. "You want to talk about who can provide for that boy," he said to the room. "She's already doing it. She's doing it alone, and she's doing it right. And the only thing she was missing was one person willing to stand next to her." That's the whole case. The judge ruled from the bench. Full custody to Nora Delaney, a restraining order against Cole Vance, and a recommendation to the district attorney about the assault. The Vances could have supervised visitation if they wanted a relationship with their grandson. If. It was over in 20 minutes. Nora walked out of that building with her son and no one chasing her, for the first time in 11 months. Silas Delaney died 9 days later, on a Tuesday afternoon, with the sun coming through the window and his great-grandson asleep on his chest. Beckett was there. He'd gone back to that little room 3 more times over those 9 days, not because anybody made him, but because the old man had asked for him, and because somewhere in there it had stopped being a favor. The last afternoon, Silas was clearer than he'd been in weeks. That happens sometimes near the end. The fog lifts. He looked up at Beckett standing by the bed, and he smiled, and he said something Beckett didn't expect. "I know you're not him." Beckett went still. "Danny," the old man's voice was thin but certain. "I know, I've known a while, my head's broke, but it's not all the way gone." His eyes were wet and calm. "She thinks she's protecting me, that's my girl, always carrying things she shouldn't have to carry." His hand found Beckett's. "But a man knows when his boy is gone. I felt it the day it happened. I just didn't have the heart to make her say it out loud." Beckett couldn't speak. "So we've both been lying to each other to keep the other one standing," Silas said, and he laughed, soft, wondering. "All this time." Then his grip tightened. "Listen to me. I don't have long, and I'm not going to waste it. You're a good man. I watched you with her. I watched you with the boy. You didn't have to come back here 3 times for a stranger." "It's not," Beckett started. "Don't," Silas smiled. "Don't tell me it's nothing. I'm dying, son. I don't have time for a man to lie about his own heart." He drew a breath that cost him. "Take care of them, not for a day. You hear me, not for 1 day. That's my last ask of anybody in this world. Take care of my girl and that baby, and let them take care of you, because I can see plain as morning you need it just as bad as they do." Beckett Kane, who had buried friends in 6 countries and never once let it show, put his head down next to an old man he'd known 9 days and wept. Silas passed that afternoon, easy, the way she'd wanted. He went knowing his girl wasn't alone. He was right about that. He'd made sure of it. They buried him next to Danny in San Antonio. Nora cried and Beckett stood beside her with Eli on his shoulder, and afterward they drove back to Kerrville because, without anybody deciding it out loud, Kerrville had become where they drove back to. The one day had ended a long time ago. Nobody had ever mentioned it again. Nora and Eli stayed. First in the spare room, then, slower than any story would tell it, because real things move slow in the rest of his life. She started helping with the horses. Turned out she was good with the broken ones, same as him. Eli learned to crawl on the barn floor with a 3-legged shepherd following him everywhere he went, guarding him from nothing and everything, the way Ranger had decided to that very first morning at the gate. Beckett would catch himself sometimes, up before the sun out of an old habit that had never loosened, standing at the fence line with a cup of coffee, and he'd hear the screen door and turn around and there they'd be, the woman and the boy walking toward him across the grass. And every single time, that old engine in his chest turned over. The thing he'd sworn was dead. It wasn't dead. It had just been waiting. He'd spent 3 years believing the kindest thing he could do for the world was want nothing from it and give it nothing back. Ask for nothing. Need no one. He'd built a fence around 100 acres and a taller one around himself and called that peace. A woman had walked up that fence line one gray morning with a baby and an impossible question, and she'd knocked the whole thing down without even trying. She'd asked him to be a father for 1 day. He'd said, "Only if you tell me why." And the why had turned out to be the truest thing anybody had handed him in a long, long time, that people who are hurting find each other, and that a man isn't finished just because he decided he was, and that sometimes the family you'd never have chosen is the one that finally brings you home. Eli took his first real steps on his 2nd birthday, in the dirt of that same driveway where a stranger had once been thrown to the ground. He walked from his mother's hands to Beckett's, 4 wobbling steps and the dog barked, and the whole gray Texas morning went gold. Beckett caught him. Of course he caught him. That was the whole point of him now, to be the one who was there to catch the fall. He was never done being needed. He'd just been waiting for someone worth being needed by. And that one day, it never did end.